part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by, and thanks for tuning in and downloading to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, all part of the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm John Sabol alongside
Scott Sabol.
All right, Scotty, this is going to be a fun one. We go way back. If you're a Cleveland native, someone that grew up in the area, maybe not living in town, or living in town, and you grew up watching the Cleveland sports scene and reading about the Cleveland sports scene, then you're going to know our guest very well. None other than Dan Coughlin, a former Fox 8 anchor and contributor continuing on the Friday Night Touchdown football show in the fall, a former Cleveland Indians beat writer, as well as a former columnist for the Plain Dealer, and somebody right now out of all the living Cleveland media, although he's not doing it full time anymore, but out of all the Cleveland living media right now, he knows the most and has been around the most of anybody around town when it comes to the Cavs, Indians, Browns, and much more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, he's going to talk about not only covering Cleveland sports, I'm sure, but he's going to talk about all the other sports that he covered and how it was to be a sports reporter, a sports writer back in the day when newspaper was king, when you had budgets that seemed like unlimited when you compare it to today's standards. And he's been all over the world. His career started in the early 60s, John. That's crazy to think. That's almost 60 years. And he's still going. He's written 4 books already. And he says he has a 5th one in the planning stages. This is going to be a really, really fun interview. And it's one of these deals. You give him a name and we're just going to let him go.
I hope we go deeper than just Cleveland sports, because when you have that type of background and experience and a resume that's just impressive, you can't help but have more experience than or more stories than just your typical day-to-day life and beats that he had back in those days. Right, and so exactly. I'm really curious to see where this goes and how this all ties back here to a city that, we all know and love.
Right. And I'm sure this is going to be a long episode, everybody. So stick with it. This is going to be really entertaining. We will have more from legendary sportscaster, sports writer Dan Coughlin when we come back.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Voorhees.
And I'm Brian Shaw. No, not the pitcher. We're the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast, formerly a Swing and a Tribe.
Don't have time to watch 162 games of baseball? We do. We have you covered with recaps of the games, stats, and analysis throughout the MLB season.
Subscribe now to Guardians of the Land and Press Play Pods for all your Cleveland sports analysis.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. My hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
All right, our guest requires really no introduction because his history here in Cleveland sports is a long and storied history. He is a longtime sports journalist, sports broadcaster. He's covered you covered the Olympics, didn't you, Danny?
I did.
You did.
In fact, I covered the memorable 1980 Winter Games.
80 Winter Games, right.
When we beat the Soviets.
Exactly. So an Indy 500s, boxing matches, and I'm just covering just the tip of the iceberg. Joining us right here, live from Gunzelman's here in Fairview Park, is none other than Dan Coughlin. Danny, welcome to our podcast. How are you doing?
Scott and John, and it's great to thank you for the invitation to be on your podcast. I mean, you must have dozens of people listening.
Well, 15, but who's counting?
Yeah.
Danny? So, Danny,
let's start at the beginning. I know that seems like, well, it's no kind of a captain.
Should we
obvious
warn
thing,
people though that there is some crowd traffic? We're on the patio.
We are.
outdoors.
Well, you have a
And
lot of
this-
your guys in there making a lot of noise.
Yeah, I know.
We get a little crazy in there. We figured we had to move outside.
I already scolded them, but now outside there's a lot of traffic here, and it's going to sound sometimes like we got those dirt bikes riding back and forth. But they haven't gone this far west.
That's all right. So, Danny, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
You're from here in Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised,
Yes.
but you didn't always live in Cleveland. How did your career start? Your
Well,
broadcast?
actually, my entire career was 99% right here in Cleveland.
Okay.
Grew up on the west side, Lakewood, St. Ed's, and when I got out of the Army, 1960. By the way, I was discharged from the Army on November 21st, 1963.
Oh, really?
In Fort Hood, Texas. And I drove north through Dallas to a job interview I had set up with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. They were looking for a general assignment reporter, and I had worked for a smaller paper in Lynchburg, Virginia before being drafted. So anyway, they were ready to hire me. All that remained was a job interview. We set that up for November 22nd, that Friday, the day after I was discharged, November 22nd, 1963. The night before, we drove north with two other fellows discharged the same day, north through Dallas, through that same underpass in Dallas where the president would be assassinated the next day. And so when people say, how'd you get your job at the Plain Dealer? I say, Lee Harvey Oswald got it for me. Because Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president an hour and a half before my interview at the Post-Dispatch was to take place. And so I immediately called the managing editor, and we said, well, okay, it's all hands on deck on this story, so no job interviews today. So I said, well, I'm going to fly home in the morning, and I'll call you in about a week, and we'll reset the interview. So I flew home that Saturday morning, and after the 12 o'clock Mass at St. Clement's on that Sunday, ran into an old family friend who had once been a newspaper man here in Cleveland. And I updated him on what I was doing, and he said, well, the Plain Dealer is going to have an opening in sports. What? Yeah, a fellow named John Dietrich is retiring. This guy still knew what was going on in the newspaper business. Ralph Novak was his name. And so he said, Gordon Cobbleding, he was the sports editor at that time. He's an old friend of mine. I'll give him a call and tell him you're gonna call him. So Monday morning I called him, and Ralph Novak had already talked to him. He invites me down for an interview. I get the job. They're still waiting for me to call them back in St. Louis. As though anybody's left there to answer the phones there either. Anyway, so that's how I wound up at the Plain Dealer, which was fine back home. I never thought I'd ever land at the Plain Dealer. That would have been, that was a dream job for me back then.
Explain to our younger listeners what it was like to be a sportscaster, writer, back then, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, versus how it's been, how everything has changed over the last 15 to 20 years.
It was great. I was 18 years at the Plain Dealer in sports. That's when I did. The Plain Dealer had a travel budget that was unbelievable. Every time they were making so much money in those days, the Plain Dealer. Every time they turned down those presses, it was like they were printing $1,000 bills flying off the presses. And they sent me everywhere around the world to cover stories. Oh, it was great. You know the movie that's up and running lately, Ford versus Ferrari?
Good movie.
I covered that race, 1966, 24 hours of wow. For the Plain Dealer. Wow. Covered it. Couldn't speak a word of French. Parlez-vous?
So you show up to something like that. Here you go, you're a kid, literally a kid from Cleveland, and you're showing up there. Where do you start? Like, you get there, you go, okay, now what do I do?
Well, first of all, I had to find a nice bar.
We all need to find a nice bar.
I adjusted to French beer real quick. And I attached myself to the AP bureau chief, who was an American who was covering the race. He was bilingual. And I sort of attached myself to him. And sat near him in the press box, and anyway, I just sort of followed in his footsteps. Kept my mouth shut and did a lot of listening, even though I didn't understand much of what was said. But anyway,
That's funny.
that was just one of many great opportunities. For instance, now, Cleveland had a pro soccer team. It's happened abruptly. 1966, the World Cup final. West Germany was it, and England. England wins in overtime, 4-3. They win the World Cup. And so a lot of excitement in this country. First time ever that the World Cup final was televised here on public television. It did not, it made, they could see on the ratings, it actually had a blip. Not a number, but it had a blip. That meant that somebody watched it. And that got everybody on Madison Avenue excited. So they started just like that. 2 soccer leagues to start in 1967. Cleveland got one of these teams. Gabe Paul and Vernon Stouffer got one of these teams. They felt that if this is probably not going to make it, but if it does, the Indians would be wise to control their summer competition for the entertainment dollar and control who else is using Cleveland Stadium. So anyway, the league that Cleveland was in, they took a year to get started, start their own teams. So they contracted with teams from around the world to represent American cities for this one league, one year. And Cleveland wound up with Stoke City, England, conveniently located. I could go over there and everybody spoke English. And I spent Hal Lebanon said, "You're our soccer writer." I said, "I don't know anything about soccer." And he said, "Well, this team from England who's going to play here this season, go over and spend a couple of weeks with them and learn the game." So I did. I spent 2 weeks with Stoke City. And he said, "And by the way, when you're over there, why don't you find an auto race to cover?" Okay. And I found that after my 2 weeks with Stoke City, here was the conveniently timed the Monaco Grand Prix over in Monte Carlo. So I spent the next week there. And now let me tell you about the night before the race. I haven't told this story in decades.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Love this.
Anyway, so it's the night before the race, and I'm in the first floor bar of the Hotel de Paris. That's the big hotel right on the square across from the casino in Monte Carlo. And I noticed that it's in the early twilight, and they've got the fans that go real slow around. And I notice every eye in the place is all focused in one direction. And so I follow their eyes, and I see there's this little cocktail table in the middle of the room, very crowded room because it's the night before this huge race. And there's 3 people sitting at this little table. Elizabeth Taylor, Graham Hill, the race car driver, and her husband, Richard Burton. And so the whole place, this whole crowded bar, did not move for 3 hours. Everybody just stared at those people. Nobody would be so rude as to walk up there and actually address them or interrupt them. So, and every night, every time Graham Hill went to light a cigarette, he smoked like a fiend. Elizabeth Taylor would grab Richard Burton's gold cigarette lighter and light Graham Hill's cigarette. And by the way, this was 1967, and she was at the top of her game. Oh, was she looking fine. Anyway, so I'm drinking my French beer all night, and so then they drank until midnight. Finally, they went to the elevators. They were all staying in that hotel, and there were all these outside, right in front of the hotel, and on the sidewalk were parked cars such as the Lamborghinis, beautiful white Lamborghini that somebody said was Richard Burton's.
Wow.
Anyway, the next day there's the race, and after the race it's traditional that they killed a guy in that race. Come to think of it, yeah, they killed the Lorenzo Bandini, the star of the Ferrari team, was killed in a fiery crash along the harbor there. And but anyway, after it's traditional in Monte Carlo that the Princess Grace and Prince Rainier, they present this trophy or something to the winning driver. And so they have on the podium, the winning driver was a Jochen Rindt or somebody like that, and the second and third place people, and here's Princess Grace now. She's not looking too shabby either. This is 1967, keep in mind. Her daughter hadn't killed her in the car crash yet. She is looking mighty fine. So I'm 30 feet away from her as they present this cup, and I've got a camera there, and I'm writing the story on this, and they wound up using one of my pictures in the Plain Dealer Sunday magazine. Yes. Anyway, so here within 24 hours, I spent a night in the bar with Elizabeth Taylor, and the next I was at the post-race ceremony with Grace Kelly.
Wow.
And that was a lot of beautiful women in one weekend. And I went over there to learn about soccer. Yeah. So when I say soccer's been very, very good to me, it was.
Wow, you can't top that weekend,
no,
now, could
you? You can't.
Wow.
No.
So from there, let's fast forward a decade. You're back, obviously you're in Cleveland, but your next job per se, or next beat, the Indians, right?
Yeah, by the 1970s, late 70s, now I'm full-time on the Indians beat. Yes.
And how many years did you cover the Indians on that beat?
I was full-time on the beat about 2.5 years.
Okay.
But I was trying to court my wife. And that's traveling the baseball beat and trying to court a woman.
It's not conducive.
I mean, they're both full-time jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say that.
So I pleaded and begged to get off the baseball beat, and so finally they relented. Let me off the baseball
I got to ask you one story
Okay.
that I think you touched on in your book, okay? This is a Cleveland Indians plane ride in 1979, and there was a fight on the plane. And Ron Pruitt, I guess, was...
Yeah.
Now, I only say that because Ron Pruitt is my neighbor.
No,
and
really?
I've known Ron Pruitt now because,
No
for
kidding.
maybe 25, 28 years.
Really?
And so what's the deal? What happened?
We had Ron Pruitt on the podcast.
Yeah,
Did you really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
last year.
No, well, he hasn't had a drink in years, I don't think.
No, well, I know, but this is going back 40-some years.
Yes.
But what happened?
Well, that's sort of germane to the story.
Oh, okay. All right.
Back then, there was a keg of beer in every major league locker room.
Right.
And guys drank after games. Sam McDowell used to sit there and guzzle beers after games, win or lose. And they all get religion sooner or later. And so, anyway, we're playing a day game, a getaway day game in Minneapolis. And we take our beating as usual, but then we have to wait. The plane, we weren't flying charters back then. The only time the Indians flew a charter back in that time was when they chartered a Wright Airlines two-prop plane, propellers, go-around propellers, to fly to Toronto. And Bun Blossom, who was the Indians' treasurer at the time, who lives right up here, not far from us.
Okay.
We could walk to his house. Anyway, he said that we kept our fingers crossed that plane did not go down in Lake Erie, because this was an old two-engine prop plane. But it was the only charter that the Indians could afford.
Almost like the plane in the movie Major League.
Exactly. That was the plane. Yes, you're right. And so, anyway, after we're regularly scheduled airlines, Mike Segge was the traveling secretary then. He still is now. And Mike would, it was hectic for him after games, especially if you go overtime and you've got a traveling party of about 35 people. You had to buy 35 tickets for a plane. And the Players Association said you have to have, nobody sits in the middle seat, so you have to buy up all the middle seats. So now the plane was late coming into Minneapolis, so they had us sit around the locker room for quite a while. And so the boys are drinking beer after the game. And finally they say, they got us, well, it looks like time to go to the airport, the plane's on its way in or something. And now we go to the airport, but the plane isn't ready for us yet, so they don't even want us at the gate yet. So the boys wind up there at one of those little, concourse bar stands, and now they're drinking more. Finally, the plane gets in, and they pick up a load of nuns. This plane is now, our next plane, we're going to Chicago. And so we're going to Chicago, where a lot of people on this flight are going to transfer to a plane flying all these nuns and priests to Rome for a visit with the Pope at the Vatican. So now they're on the plane, all our guys, and now there's more drinking on the plane. We've been drinking for a couple hours in the locker room, and drinking for a couple hours at the airport, and now we're drinking more. It's a 90-minute flight, I think, from Minneapolis to Chicago.
And this is commonplace, though, back then.
Yes. Well,
not to this degree.
Not right. Anyway, so now we land in Chicago O'Hare, and it's a hot middle of July, hot day. And they don't have a gate for us because I don't know why, because we're running so far behind. And so they told us I'll park way out on the far end of a runway here. And so to save his battery, he turns off the air conditioning. And it's hot out there. And this is now, it's beyond late afternoon. It's 6, 7 o'clock. And it was getting hotter and hotter in the plane. Suddenly there's a commotion. And I see, and their bodies are tumbling down this center aisle. And they go past me, and especially the nuns sitting in the aisle and priests. Nuns are in their black. Back then, all the nuns wore the big fancy habits. And the nuns in defensive postures, arms up, like, yeah, too bad we don't have pictures here. But anyway, so as they go tumbling past me, I see, holy smokes, it's Ron Pruitt and our relief pitcher, Victor Cruz. Wow. And finally, shortly after that, I guess that the pilot radioed, SOS, get us a gate right now. And so they did. They got us a gate. Boom, he fires it up, and then we go to the gate. And so now I'm sitting in the front of the plane. The coach and the media and the manager, we sit up in front. And we're the first ones off the plane, and I'm waiting for these guys to come down the runway from the plane. Back then, you'd get on and off the planes down on the tarmac.
Mm-hmm.
Tarmac. Anyway, and so I grabbed, what the heck is going on? I say to Pruitt. He said, oh, we do that in the bullpen all the time. Well, and yeah, they were drunk and had a fist fight, an actual fist fight, tumbling down the aisle.
Did it kind of look like one of those like Looney Tunes, like, cloud of dust and people, and a head comes out here and a leg comes out here?
Almost, but no dust. No. Yeah.
But instead of dust, you had nuns.
They were tumbling. Yeah.
Instead of dust, yes. Danny, you had nuns and priests next to it.
That's right.
That's
incense.
Yeah. Right, incense.
So that was. It was. Too bad I couldn't have stayed on the baseball beat. I'd probably still be on it.
Well, back then the Indians were so bad.
They were bad, and back then to spice up my stories, I began every baseball game story with 4 lines of light verse, a little 4-line poem in italic type on top of the story. And so I wound up, and I thought, this is crazy. I'm now rooting against us. We'd be in Kansas City, Chicago, Texas, an hour time zone away. Now, I could still get my game story in. My deadline was about 11 o'clock at night, and they'd hold it for the last possible minute to get my game story in there.
Yeah, so they had to print the papers for those younger listeners out there that don't remember or know.
That's right. Oh, yeah. We had the night game stories in the paper every day, every morning.
Yeah.
And so if I had my poem written, for instance, Indians lose 5-3 to the White Sox. Now we're rallying the top of the ninth. Wait a minute here. I'm going to miss this deadline so I'm rooting against us. Don't tie this. No, go down quietly because my poem is written.
How many times did your poem get, changed?
Occasionally.
Yeah.
Well, more than about half the time. About half the time.
Did you have a favorite Indians player from that time? Late 70s, early 80s?
We had such great guys. Buddy Bell, Dwayne Kuiper, really good guys. Toby Harrah, good guy. Bobby Bonds, good guy. Really good guy, Bobby Bonds.
Speaking of which, you told me this story, and I'm going to mess it up here, but didn't you have to go out to L.A. or San Francisco to interview Bobby Bonds, and you saw Barry as a little kid, right?
As about a 12-year-old kid riding a little bike around.
And,
yes.
And little did you know you would become, one of the greatest baseball players of all time.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Wow. Little did I know.
Wow.
Yes.
So let's go from baseball to basketball. You got to cover and follow LeBron James. I mean, decades later, obviously, early 2000s, in his high school years and early in his Cavaliers years before you eventually retired from working at Fox 8. What was it like covering LeBron in those days? We talked to John Tellage about it, and I remember it like it was yesterday, being a high schooler because he's a year younger than me, and then watching him as a Cavs fan in those early years. But for you to cover him at the high school level and get to know him
Are we allowed to say on your podcast, pain in the ass?
You sure can. You're allowed to.
Pain in the ass.
Yeah.
That's how it was covering LeBron James. Here's an example. Because he quickly became the face of the NBA. And so after every practice, we had to get a comment from LeBron. There was the coach, Mike Brown, was good. He would do his duty. They would get some other player to do their duty. They hated it, but as you know, after practice, all you need is a couple of comments.
Yep.
But we had to have LeBron on, and he would let us sit. He would have us wait, and because it's LeBron, during the LeBron James era, we would have a dozen people covering every practice, and half of them, including highly paid union photographers.
Oh, yeah.
And he would let us sit for an hour after everybody else did their duty. I mean, wait, I'm going to have lunch first. I'm going to lift first.
What was the reasoning?
No reason. Just selfishness. Just because he.
LeBron's still like that, and not to put any defense to him or defend him. A lot of NBA guys are like that. Well, they will, take their time and they're going to go ahead and let themselves relax, unwind.
Yes.
No one's going to push them, hey, you have your media time to do that. When you hit that upper echelon of an athlete in this day and age, they take advantage of it and they're just kind of relaxing. And LeBron.
That was LeBron. And then so that was more than once. After waiting for an hour, he would send one of those assistants over to say, well, LeBron's decided he's not going to talk today.
Yeah.
No, he was just rude. Rude.
Did you find yourself rooting for him then when he came back and eventually won the championship?
No. When they said he's coming back, fortunately, I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Yes.
Because you weren't working.
Right.
But what about as a fan?
Oh, the fans don't know that.
No, but you as a fan, were you ever a fan of the Cavs before? And could you help yourself become a fandom because you know how much it would have meant for the city at the time for him to win a title for the city, and eventually he did. Part of you had to at least root for that a little bit, right? You had to take the journalistic hat off for a second, right?
No.
Really?
No, I wasn't rooting for LeBron at all. No.
Okay.
He was... Let's go back to the very beginning with LeBron.
Yeah.
Now, he's a freshman in high school, and St. Vincent St. Mary qualifies for the Final Four for the first time they'd been to the Final Four 25 years before that, maybe once or twice. But now it's a big story. So I go down to their last practice before they got on the bus and go to Columbus with a photographer, Bill Wolf or somebody, and I talked to the coach, Keith Danbro, and got him and talked to a couple of the seniors on the team. And so we got our B-roll, And I go up and say goodbye, and we're packing up, and I go up to say goodbye. Keith, thanks, a lot good luck in Columbus. And he said, did you talk to LeBron? I said, LeBron, you see that freshman? I said, well, no, I got you and I got a couple of the seniors. And he said, you should get LeBron.
Yeah, because typically, for people listening out there, you get seniors and you don't bother with freshmen for a number of reasons because, A, they're maybe immature, they're not that good, they're just not the stars of the team.
And secondly, I did not know that he was the star of the team as a freshman. So I went up to, what have I asked LeBron? I don't even know the guy.
Yeah.
I know nothing about him. Said, how do the older kids on the team treat you? And he gives a usable 8 seconds, and I come back with it and use that 8 seconds, not knowing that that would be the 8 seconds that would make LeBron famous on Channel 8.
Right.
Because we then used that when he wound up, a few months later, he winds up on the cover of Sports Illustrated. We use that soundbite. Channel 8, the first TV station to recognize LeBron James, and use that 8 seconds. We use that 8 seconds so many times, and so I have to, I got to find out when Keith Sandorf's birthday is and send him a present every year at that time because he saved my rear end. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So that would have been 2000. Would have been
As a freshman?
Let's see, he graduated 03, 99, 2000.
Well, you're a year older than him.
Younger.
You're younger. He's like 40 and you're 39. So
No, he is
38.
Oh, he's 38.
Yeah, he's 38.
38. Okay.
He was a grade. I think he was a year and some change older than me, but a grade above me.
Gotcha.
'Cause I'll be 36 in October, so something like that.
So let's go backwards again, Danny.
Okay.
10-cent beer night.
Oh,
You take it from there.
well, in my first book, I have a big, fairly long chapter on 10-cent beer night. It actually started, and Pete Franklin had a lot to do with that. Pete was a big radio star here. He did the first major call-in sports talk show on 1100. Indians back then, everybody was doing 10-cent beer nights. In fact, it was about the third or fourth that the Indians had done. Their first one was, I think, like 1971, and it was a Sunday afternoon over the July 4th weekend, and it was a charming event. They had like turn of the century bands strolling, guitars and banjos and things like that, and the straw hats and the colorful striped blazers roaming through the stands, and it was a beautiful, warm, sunny.
No issues.
No, none whatsoever. It was charming, and so the Indians were the first ones to invent this, and so other teams quickly picked it up because it was such a charming event, and so second and third years they did it. I won, in fact, one of those years. I held a beer drinking contest with 3 or 4 old South friends of mine from the West Side, famous beer drinkers, and I there was an empty suite in the old press box, a booth there, and so I had a runner to keep running beers to these guys, and one guy drank 35 beers. The winner drank like 40 beers.
Wow.
Yes, that was good. These guys were good.
What kind of beer are we talking here?
I think that it was Jedseys. I think at that time, because I used Jedesey in the book because I think Jackie York, the Indians promotion director, said that was their, I think, their TV sponsor, Jedesey, and that's why they had Jedesey in the concession stands. Anyway, so this might have been the first time they did 10-cent beer night, and it started with Nickel Beer Day. So this is now the first time they did it at night. And there was a full moon that night.
Oh.
At night. And so Jackie York, recalling it, she said there was something different about the crowd. She says, every event we ever had, we'd recognize the same people all the time. Because if the Indians averaged 5,700 people a game. They were the same 5,700 people every night, counting them 81 times. So she said, there were people I did not recognize. A lot of young kids, college kids, like the former host of Meet the Press,
Russert,
Tim Russert. He said he was going to John Carroll at the time. He said he went to that night and he had $2 in his pocket. Said the beers were 10 cents each. How many beers did I have? You do the math. His famous quote.
Oh, that's too funny.
So anyway, it was just, the crowd was unusual. You didn't necessarily smell trouble right off the bat, but the crowd was different.
When did you know that trouble was brewing? No pun intended on the beer brewing.
Very good.
Very good. Write that down. Anyway, by the 4th or 5th inning, things were getting a little crazy. And by then, we had a couple of guys had ran out naked, slid into second base, got a hell of a strawberry. And one of the girls were running out there, lift up their shirts with no bras, flash the crowd. It was great. And then throwing firecrackers down from the upper deck.
Wow.
Into the bullpen. Firecrackers, hammer bombs, cherry bombs, boom, boom, boom's going on all the time. And this was getting louder, and fans were getting bolder. One guy, streaking was very popular back then. This guy, stark naked, jumped out of the lower deck behind first base and ran out, and he's now running inside the outfield fence. And he can't, back then they had coverings on the outfield fence, canvas, whatever. And what he can't see is there's the police running on the other side of the fence, but they're with their talkies. They're getting a report from cops in the upper deck saying, yeah, you're right alongside them now. Keep going right alongside them, but they have these huge garbage bags. And said when this guy then tried to jump over the fence, they were there on the other side with the garbage bag and put him in a garbage bag and dragged him off. And the fans cheered, dragging this guy off in the garbage bag. Did you know that they actually had a jail cell down in the bowels of the stadium?
We heard about that.
Yes, I saw it. It's a jail cell, a legitimate cell. Big old steel doors, bars, yes, put him in there. By the end of the night, they had a lot of people in there. You did not need a reservation. But it was standing room only in there.
But now what happened to you during all this?
Well, by the time it's over, and by the, let's go back just a couple more days, because a week before that, the Indians played the Texas Rangers on their beer night. And the Rangers beer night, their fans were pouring beer on the Indians players, throwing cups of beer at them. Pearl beer, or whatever kind of that Texas beer is, Lone Star beer. Anyway, it tastes like vodka. Anyway.
Well, beer back then wasn't very good in general.
Anyway, and there was an incident early in that game. And there was a fight. Oh yeah, the Indians' first baseman, John Ellis, got into a fist fight with somebody on the Rangers. And there were expulsions and things like that. After the game, Bert Grape, I think, was the covered for the press. Bob Sudik, for some reason, a regular baseball writer, took the trip off. And so Bert Grape covered the Indians, and he quoted Billy Martin as saying, well, we're going to Cleveland next. You better tell your guys to get ready. So anyway. So all week, Pete Franklin on the radio is hyping this thing, revenge against the Rangers. Their fans poured beer on our guys. We had a fist fight there. And so the Rangers are coming up here to get even with us, but we're going to be right. Pete built this every night on the air. He had quite a following, Pete Franklin did. So anyway, everybody was in a hostile mood, let's say. they were arriving, many of them arriving already drunk at the game, drunk and hostile. So now that set the stage for what happened then. So after the game, the game had been forfeit. We were going to win the game, by the way. Mm-hmm. And we were in the pennant race to that point. It's the ninth inning. We trail by 2. And we got it to within 1, and we still have the winning and tying runs on last of the ninth. Tying and winning runs on base. And by then it was something happened. The fans were out in right field. There must have been several hundred fans now milling around in right field, surrounding Jeff Burroughs, who was having a heck of a year, an MVP year with the Rangers at the time. And so now, from what Billy Martin saw in the dugout, which is lower, all he saw was Jeff Burroughs was down on the ground, and he thinks they're surrounded by drunken fans. And he thinks they're attacking Jeff Burroughs. They've knocked him down. No, what happened was the one fan knocked off Burroughs' cap, tried to grab his cap, but didn't get it, dropped it, and so Burroughs was reaching down on the ground to pick up his cap. So that's why Jeff Burroughs bending down to pick up his cap looks like Burroughs was knocked down. And so Billy Martin gets his "Let's go, boys." He comes charging out with bats. Here come the Rangers. And there, back then, I don't know, people might have said there were 1,000 people out there in right field, but realistically, there were probably a couple hundred. That's a lot of people.
Still a lot of
in the middle of a ball game.
Right.
Yeah.
So they couldn't get. They had Herb Score go on the PA system, pleading with the fans to get off the field and let them resume the game. Well, by then, that didn't work, and they would not have been able to resume the game anyway, because all 3 bases had been stolen.
And never
somebody left the stadium with the base under.
And from our research and talking to some of the Indians historians, those bases have never been found.
Right. Really?
So, but continue on that, because you got punched in the jaw.
Oh yeah. Okay. Let's resume to that. Now, after the game has been forfeited, time has passed. They've turned off the stadium lights. All the fans have left, except for about a dozen teenagers standing on top of the Rangers dugout, demanding that they come out and fight.
Of course.
So I get with my official reporter's notebook clearly visible. I jump up on top of the dugout, and I ask them, what they're trying to prove. I said, these guys have left. They're on a bus back to the hotel already. And so one guy reaches from behind another guy in front of him and punches me right in the jaw. Didn't even stagger me. Kid wasn't, his feet weren't planted, he was off balance when he threw it. Didn't know how to throw a punch. I knew how to take a punch, I'd taken enough of them. And so it didn't even stagger me. However, I figured it's going to be fruitless to try to make sense with these guys, so I left. And over the years, I'd heard reports that I thought that there were a bunch of guys from Cathedral Latin, but later on I learned that no. But anyway, and I did get a name of a guy which I've lost now over the period of time. So anyway, I got punched, but no harm, no foul.
So let's stay on the baseball track, Danny. I'm going to give you a name, and you tell me your experiences if you had a chance to interview this person or what George Steinbrenner.
Okay, George Steinbrenner. I like George a lot. People think that if George had bought the Indians, that we would have been in all those World Series. It's not necessarily true. In fact, probably not true. Because the advantage he had in New York is Larry Dolan's brother Charles wired the city of New York for cable. And he was paying the Yankees back in the late 70s. What was it? $5 million a year or something for cable rights, when the Indians, for all of their TV rights, were getting maybe $50,000 for all of their TV. And Charles Dolan was paying George Steinbrenner to pay the Yankees. So anyway, but I like George a lot. I'm in New York to cover he loved the grandstand play. I'm in New York to cover an alley fight, it was an outdoor fight at Yankee Stadium. Ken Norton, alley against Ken Norton. And I'm in the night before the fight, I'm in P.J. Clark's, digging with a bunch of other newspaper columnists from around the country, all in for the fight. And in strolls George Steinbrenner. And George, I introduce him around, and he says, he buys around, of course, and he says, do you need any tickets for the fight tomorrow? Because he was really the main tenant, and he sublet Yankee Stadium to the fight promoters to Madison Square Garden for the outdoor fight. So there were only 60,000 seats or 70,000 seats in Yankee Stadium then. They're all the seats in the world. So, but anybody need tickets? You need any tickets for the fight? I said, no, I got plenty, and we all have our media credentials for the fight. And the next day, I go out with my old friend George Lamb, strolling around New York the next morning, fight night. And I get back to the hotel about noon, and here is a message. And the message is to call George Steinbrenner's office. And so I did. And it's his secretary. And she says, well, Mr. Steinbrenner wants to make sure that you don't need any tickets for the fight tonight. I said, no, I'm fine. Now, I never mentioned to George what hotel I was at. But, so he had his secretary call around, I guess. But a clue was that I was staying at the same hotel where the Indians stayed because we got the club rate. And so it was fairly easy to find me, I guess. But nobody at the station knew where I was going. I was only there for a couple of days. But anyway, that was it. He knew that I would tell the story, that I would even tracked him down to make sure that I didn't need any ticket.
So let's switch gears. George Steinbrenner and now Art Modell. What's your...
I'm sympathetic to Art Modell, by the way.
Really?
Yes, I am.
I would think you'd be the opposite.
No, because I knew Art, and I knew what a decent guy he was, and how the city of Cleveland kept, among other things, they kept to build the Science Museum and the Hall of Fame, the Music Hall of Fame.
Right, Rock Hall.
Right. They stole his parking lot. His customers lost all those parking places. They made life tough for Art and his customers. And and then when they went and built the final straw, they built a brand new stadium for the Indians, a team which, because of their own circumstances, had not tried to win in over 30 years. Indians hadn't tried. They didn't have the money. They didn't try to win. The Browns tried to win every year. And then the city goes and builds the new stadium for the team that never tried. And so that's when he said, I can't do business with these people any longer. So they left him with every year, and Art Modell, he bailed out the city of Cleveland when he took over the stadium from them. He leased the stadium for like $1 a year, but then he had to maintain it. And he said, first of all, first year he owned it, discovered this place has to be totally rewired. $1 million to rewire the stadium. The next year, the whole place had to be replumbed. Oh my God, another $1 million. He said that back in those days, there were some people who would stand on holding a sign that said John 3:16 or something. Art said, I always thought that was the location of the only working men's room in the stadium. Section 3, anyway.
Wow.
So they did not have the money to accommodate until now. It was hysteria time. He's leaving, so now hysterically they build a brand new stadium and give it to the NFL. So that was crazy. They built a stadium that could only be used but 10 times a year. If they'd have built a stadium right with a dome on it and everything, they could have been in the rotation to hold the Big Ten championship game, like at Indianapolis and Detroit is in the rotation to have college bowl games. We could have had the Big Ten championship game every second or third year. We could have held the state high school football championships there.
Speaking of dome stadiums, so I was going through an old filing cabinet, and it was right next to the weather office. And sure enough, I don't even know the reporter that covered this, but it's a huge, big press release packet from the Dome Stadium Corporation.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe this was
the Dome Stadium Corporation?
Yeah, so 1985, when they were thinking about building a dome stadium, which we know, never really happened. But take us back, to the mid-'80s, when there was talk of building a dome stadium. Why did that all fall apart? Or is it just real complicated?
It was sort of complicated. To begin with, the city of Cleveland had no money. In fact, George Vinovich was by then, he was he a senator by then? He told Art privately, don't count on anything from them. The former mayor, the city has no money. And so I knew they'd have no money. And anything they said was an empty promise.
Wow. All right, let's go back. John, I'm going to go back to the Muhammad Ali story. You had a chance. You picked up Muhammad Ali in your car in the early 60s. Tell us that one.
Well, he had just won the heavyweight championship. And he was appearing on the Mike Douglas noontime show on Channel 3. And so I picked him up from Channel 3 when he was done, and I drove him up to, he was staying at a hotel, an old black hotel on East 55th Street called the Majestic Hotel. And excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. I'm talking nonstop, but holy cow. Anyway, I drive him up to the Majestic Hotel, and there was just me and Ellie. And I had, back then, and this is 64, 65, he had just won the World Heavyweight Championship, knocked out Sonny Liston. And I go out, he didn't have a handler, but he didn't have an entourage, just him and me. And so we go up this rickety old, this was once a Cleveland millionaire's mansion, this old Majestic Hotel, south on East 55th Street around Cedar or Central. And we get off the elevator, top floor, third floor, and we go to this little room, and it had one bed, one chair, not even a chair, a bed and a bureau dresser that came up about eyeball high. And Allie back then, and for a long time, Allie always wore a suit and tie. He dressed like a gentleman. And he was only, 21 years old or so when he won the title. But he looked like dressed like a gentleman. And so we're in his room, and he takes off his suit coat, hung up, and there was two hangers in this little closet. And then he took off his tie, and he's telling me, I sit on the edge of his bed, and he's standing talking, and I'm asking him about this Muslim stuff, how he's already changed his name to Muhammad Ali. But of course, for us old white guys, I was a young guy, however. I was like 26 or something. Anyway, I don't call him Muhammad. That sounded so awkward to call a man Muhammad.
Yeah, foreign back then, for sure.
He was Cassius Clay, but he didn't want to be called Cassius Clay, but I couldn't call him Muhammad, so commonplace back in those days, I called him Champ. Yeah, Champ this, yeah, Champ that. He knew what was going on, but he didn't say anything. But he told me all about how the blacks and whites said he's got nothing against white people, but it's just God's plan that blacks and whites should not live together on the same continent. What?
Mm-hmm.
So here he was fighting for white guys. Madison Square Garden, all those white guys there promoted his fights. And his trainer was a white guy. An Italian guy from New York, good guy, whose name escapes me right now. He's been dead for years. Anyway, and he goes on and on about this, and I'm writing it down, and now he's all the time, there's something, rubbing something on his face. And I'm trying to see what it is. There's a jar, a blue jar of something, some kind of ointment. That's on the top of his dresser, and he's rubbing that stuff on his face and on his hands. If we had a picture here, you'd see me rubbing my face and my hands, and I'm wondering, what in the heck is this? So finally, at some point, I feigned as though I'm standing up. I've been sitting on the edge of his bed for a long time. I stand up and stretch, as though I'm stretching, so that I can stand up and get a look at this. And it says on this jar, whitening cream. Whitening cream. What the hell? Now, I did not call him on this for this reason. I'm a guest in his hotel room.
Right.
I'm not going to argue with him or pick a fight with him or something or demand to know, what is this whitening cream, you phony? No, so I just filed it away. And so I tell the story for years. I said, it's whitening cream. And he had a very light-skinned complexion because one of his great-grandfathers was an Irish guy.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, he's part Irish. Huh. That's what gives him his wonderful personality. So, anyway, so I finally, it took me, remember Stacy?
Sure.
What was her last name?
Stacy Bell.
Stacy Bell.
Yeah.
What a sweetheart she was, Stacy Bell.
Former
And
Fox 8 anchor.
Yeah.
I'm telling her this story, and she says, "Oh, whitening cream, that's common because many black people, they have an uneven pigment in their skin, and that balances out the pigments, makes it levels out their pigment. Oh, I'll be damned, I didn't know that. Puts it a little different light on the whole thing. However, but he's always had a good time with white people. Howard Cosell, always playfully around white people. He worked for white people, but until Don King became a promoter. And Don King used this with Herbert Muhammad. Said, he makes all these white people rich. He should fight for me, a black promoter. And that's how Don King became the promoter of several of Allie's big fights.
Did you ever interview Don King over the years?
I was the first one to write a story about Don King in the Plain Dealer.
No kidding.
No, yes.
What year would that have been?
I'm going to guess 74 or so. He had just gotten out of jail, Mansfield Reformatory. And so, I don't know, somehow somebody told me that he wants to tell you a story. He wants to become a boxing promoter. So I meet him at this black bar and restaurant on Carnegie at about 80th Street at midnight. And I interviewed him till 2:30 in the morning.
Wow.
And I did the first big story on Don King, murderer, and he wants to become a boxing promoter.
Wow.
And so I was his Boswell for many years.
Right.
Yes.
When was the last time you spoken to him?
4 or 5 years ago, when he put on a show for Showtime at Cleveland State. Yes.
What about, we have a list here of Cleveland personalities and Cleveland athletes. What about your time with Albert Bell?
Albert was a difficult man. Now, of course, for some reason, he's trying to make friends with. He calls Paul Hoynes periodically.
He calls Tony Rizzo too.
And the Riz too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, I'm just because he was such a jerk, an absolute total jerk. My last straw with him was when the Malley people, they're friends of ours. They're from right here, St. Angeles Parish, Malley Candy Company, and they would turn out a candy bar.
Yeah, the Bell Bar.
That's right, the Bell Bar.
I remember that was like 95, was it?
Something like that.
Yep.
So anyway, he agreed to do this little press conference before a game and to promote with the Malley family. Bill Malley and Bill Malley came down, and Albert never showed up.
Never did.
Gets to the ballpark, goes right to the locker room, gets his jersey on, and goes off for batting practice. So I was furious. And so I ripped him in. I was doing columns for like the Clear Chronicle, the Lorraine County paper and all that, and I ripped him pretty good. That was the last straw with me and Albert.
Man.
And I'm just grateful that he suffered that hip injury that shortened his career, so that he never, I would not have to confront this battle within my conscience of voting for him for the Baseball Hall of Fame. I was voting for the Hall of Fame back then. And he did not, fortunately, his career ended before he had the credentials that guaranteed him entry to the Hall of Fame. So he was never on the ballot.
Because if you would have played another 5-7 years, even with a normal decline,
That's right.
those credentials would have been pretty close.
Yes, they would have been. It would have been difficult not to vote for him.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead, Joe.
I was going to ask one more because I'm getting a text message as we are recording this from our coworker and your good friend Nick Kovac. He wanted me to ask you. Nick Kovac is a producer at Fox 8, who Scott and I work with, who's also worked with you, Danny, for years on Friday Night Touchdown.
Well, you've got him there. Ask him, am I going to be back on Friday Night Touchdown?
I'll text him right now.
Are we asking employment questions for you on the podcast?
He asked me, if you haven't already, ask him about Duke Sims.
Oh,
my Lord! I know.
My God.
I know the story. And okay, Danny, you take it.
I don't know this story. I don't know who this guy is.
Well, you'll never hear the story from me today.
Okay.
Not on any public forum.
No,
all right.
no,
Okay. All right.
From the mic side.
However, I liked Duke a lot. I can tell a couple parts of it.
Who is Duke? Was he a former player?
First baseman, wasn't he,
Yeah,
for the
first
Indians?
baseman, backup catcher.
In the 70s. Okay.
Say late 60s.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I liked Duke a lot. He was a lot of fun to be around. One night I'm drinking on the east side, and we're talking about 1972, 70. I mean, 60, let's say 66, 67. And I run into Duke. It's in the off season, middle of the winter. I run into Duke at a party on the east side, at a bar on the east side. We wound up closing the bar, and he was living on the west side at that time, in one of those big apartment buildings at West Boulevard in Detroit, those big, huge apartment buildings. And so we had on Wesley, and nothing would do, but he said he had to stop it. I had to stop at his place for one more beer on the way home. So, okay, we do. We go up there to his apartment, unlocks the door, walks in, and a naked girl runs from left to right, from the bedroom to the living room to the kitchen, and back again. Whoa. And Dick says, I forgot that I left her here this morning. So, anyway, that was that.
I got you.
So, but
there's other parts of that. There's other parts of that you can't say.
But however, about 3 or 4 years ago, it's a Sunday afternoon in the baseball playoffs, and I'm watching a playoff game early January, and the phone rings, and it's Duke Sims calling. He's living in Las Vegas now. And he's lamenting the fact that he never went to college and never got a college degree because he thinks he's so smart now that he would like to run for public office, like run for a big time office.
Now, how old is he now? He's got to be 80 years old now, 75, 80?
80. And he said, because most of us didn't realize just how smart he was. Wow. Well, that was Duke. And I liked him
That's all you can say. I know that.
Real quick,
Yeah,
Nick just texted me back saying it's always your decision.
Okay.
And he just made the decision. The decision. And I remember after you had told me the story that you can't tell. I was on MLB.
Wait a minute. You're not going to tell that story here. We're still live.
No, I'm not going to say no. But I was, and it might have been a couple of years after you had told the Duke Sims story. And I remember being at work, and I was on. Pardon me, my voice is acting up too. I was on MLB.com, and sure enough, there's a story about Duke Sims. I'm like, it was just a story about where is this player?
Where is he?
And I remember sharing it with you, going, "Hey, is this the Duke Sims?" He goes, "Oh, that's it." And they tell the story about where he was living.
Yes.
So now I'm going to shift gears, John, real quick here. And
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to tell the name, and I don't know if there's parts of it you can tell or not.
My story's getting a little too long.
No. We can always edit them down if we think they're bad.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay, the famous editing.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
Which we know about. We haven't even talked about your technology.
Yeah. Doug Deacon.
Deacon is a classic. He is a true American classic. Never needed the job. His parents were millionaires. They owned half of central farmland in central Illinois.
Really?
Yes. Well, I'll never forget. I did the first story I did on it. It was midway through the 71 season or something, and Dick Shafrath, the Browns' starting left tackle, he was starting to break down, and so they were going to make a starting change. They announced in a Monday press conference that this guy named Doug Deacon, the rookie, was going to start at left tackle. Mm-hmm. So I said, gee, nobody knows anything about Doug Deacon, this 7th round draft choice. So I'm waiting for him when he comes into the locker room the next morning, and tell him that I got to do a story on him. He's now the starting left tackle. So okay. He sits down on his little stool in front of his locker, and he's got smoking a cigarette, and he's got dipping inside his lip, and he's spitting in the styrofoam cup. And he tells me his life story, how, one of 3 sons born in a farm in central Illinois, Streator, Illinois, and was a tight end at University of Illinois. Now he's a tackle. And so anyway, it goes on and on and on. And so the next day, I walk in the locker room, Deacon comes up to me with the plain dealer folded under his arm, and he said, "You killed my brothers." What? Pulls the paper out and says, "Look at this." In the first paragraph, Doug Deacon, youngest of 3 brothers, going on the farm, central Illinois, blah, blah, blah. Then he's looking down the 7th paragraph, Deacon, comma, an only child. What? This is because back then, you try to write a story at the plain dealer, and that the phones are ringing all the time. People calling, people in bars, answer this question, solve this argument. And that's because we had nobody to answer the phone in the sports department. At the Deacon, we had a friendly hostility. He would pull practical jokes on me, I would pull practical jokes on him. And that's how it went for years and years and years.
And then you guys all got along in the long run.
Right. We'd drink together, and Maddie and I get back from our honeymoon, and here Deacon had been in our house. And he had glued, the super glue, mirrors on our bedroom, the ceiling. We get back from our honeymoon, what the heck? Not only that, but a lot of other made some several alterations in our house. Back then in Lakewood. We didn't lock our doors.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So how long did you keep the mirrors up?
Well, he had to come back over and took off his shoes, stocking feet on the bed and taking them down. It was hard to get them down because they were super glued.
Right. But it was all in good fun.
Oh, yeah.
All in good fun, yeah. All right, so Joe Tate.
A wonderful, wonderful man. Really was. He played on my Sunday morning softball team one time.
What year would that have been? 80s?
I don't know, 75, something like that.
Okay.
And turned out he wasn't very good. Sort of like Ken Carmen. Ken Carmen says, we played Maslin Perry. So we said, he must have had, with his size, he must have been terrific. He said, no, actually, I wasn't very good. Later on, somebody ran into Keith Wakefield, who's still coaching Maslin Perry. And he said, no, he's right, he wasn't very good. But anyway, so anyway, he's not got my Sunday morning. I have a chapter on that in one of my books.
Okay.
And so we're Sunday morning, and he's 0 for 40. And he's so slow. You had him at first base. Slow. So anyway, we have, for one of the rare times of my Sunday morning softball team, we actually have the bases loaded and nobody out. And who's coming to the plate but Joe Tate? And the guys are telling me, pinch hit for Joe, don't let him hit. He said, no, he's the most faithful guy here. He never misses a game. And so I know he's going to hit. So they were mad at me. I let him hit. He grounded into a triple play.
No.
Yes. He grounded to the third baseman. Third baseman waited for the ball to get to him. Gets steps on third, rifles the ball to second, still gets the guy for a double play now. Now he throws to first base. Joe's not even halfway there yet. Triple play. Ends the inning. We lose again. Yes. But anyway, a lovely guy. One time, Joe watched his pennies for some reason. So we're on a playoff trip to Boston during might have been the Miracle of Richfield year. That would have been,
75,
something like that. Anyway, and so we're on the bus riding back to the airport after the game. Back then we traveled with the team, and he bragged. He said, "Listen, you know how much I spent on this trip? Not a dime." He said, "See, I found this Boston Globe. Somebody abandoned it in the lobby of the hotel this morning. We got here yesterday. Found the Boston Globe left abandoned in the lobby. I didn't even have to buy a paper coming or going. We ate at Boston Garden in the main press room. They give us a snack on the plane. I did not spend a dime, except for, I guess, parking at the airport. If that might have been it. Unless he got a ride with somebody to the airport. Maybe he did."
That's funny.
How about Warren Spahn, A Night on the Town?
I loved Warren Spahn. He really was a good guy. Before he even got to the major leagues, he was in the infantry in World War II, Battle of the Bulge, all those famous The Bridge Too Far story. He was right there, had a bridge blown off from underneath him. So now, long after his Hall of Fame pitching career is over, he was our pitching coach for a year or two with the Indians. And I'm traveling with the Indians on and off back then. And so we're in Milwaukee, which is where Spahn pitched for the Milwaukee Braves for many years. And he knew all these places in Milwaukee. So he says he and Bobby Hoffman, the coach, they're going to take me out drinking in Milwaukee. They're going to show me Milwaukee after this one game. So sure enough, off we go. We go bar hopping. And we're in this one bar, and this bartender had a German accent. Turned out he was in the German army. And Spahn says, "I shot guys like you," and everybody was drinking pretty good by now. And I swear to God, if he had a rifle with him, Spahn would have shot him right there. And I'm thinking, holy shit, this is going to be embarrassing for me, because to be associated with Spahn and Hoffman, they beat the shit out of this German bartender in Milwaukee. And who's the innocent party with them? Who is me. So anyway, Spahn was a likable guy. Really was not a big guy though. Yeah. He was maybe 5'9", short legs. He was no bigger than me. Wider in the shoulders, of course. But a nice man.
2 more stories, and then we're going to wrap up with a couple of quick segments. And I've seen video of this story. You flipping a race car?
I remember this video. I've seen this.
So,
yes.
And what was the circumstance? I mean, we used that in promos at the station for years when you worked at the station.
Oh, yes.
And we can laugh about it now, but that wasn't so funny back when it happened.
That's part of the reason I'm getting a spinal fusion in 3 weeks. Yes.
Really?
Yes. I was doing a story with racing with the good old boys at Barberton Speedway. So it's a little 1/8 mile track, and they painted this little race car, Fox 8, the yellow and black, our station colors at the time. And so it was the details of the race are not important, but I didn't finish one lap. I wound up. I tried to take those. It's like one big curve, but I tried to take it way too fast. Wind up upside down, go into a wall, straight perpendicular into a wall, upside down. And I thought I broke my back.
Oof.
They stopped the race. They got an ambulance out on the track. They tell me, "Don't move, we'll get you out of there." Okay, I can't move. So yeah, I'm waiting to get you guys get me out of here. So now just then, Maddie and our kids are little. This would have been, let's say, 1995. Our kids are like in high school and down. Just then, when Maddie and the kids, I had been down there the afternoon for qualifying. So Maddie and the kids arrived later, and they're coming through the pass gate. They say, "Oh, Mrs. Coughlin, you're here just in time. They're putting your husband in the ambulance now." So she comes down on the track, and they're now putting me in the back of this ambulance. And I say, by the way, they take me from the car across several feet to the ambulance, and I give the fans, the crowd, too bad we don't have a picture right here. I'm waving to the crowd.
I remember that.
I'm okay. So anyway, I tell Maddie, I'll be fine. My back hurt me ever since.
Okay.
They took me to the downtown Barberton hospital. They took X-rays, and this doctor must have been 75 years old. He's working the night shift, the weekend night shift at Barberton's emergency room. But I don't know who he irritated, but he was still on the night shift, the weekend night shift.
All right, last big story, and I'm sure I won't do it justice by describing it, but back in the day, you went undercover playing high school football.
Oh, yes, that was... back then, a fellow named, who was it that wrote the book Paper Lion? George, you remember, had a bestseller, trying out for the Detroit Lions, Paper Lion. And this guy really was a good quarterback at Yale, an Ivy League. And he actually went undercover with the Detroit Lions, got the coach to go along with him. And so he wrote what it was really like as a walk-on, as an undrafted free agent, trying out for it, because he could play a little bit. So he could fool these guys for a little bit.
Right.
But I wasn't going to be fooling anybody. So anyway, Hal Lebovitz wanted me to do the same thing with the Browns. And Art Modell thought it was a good idea. But it would be a fun story to get the Browns involved in. Mm-hmm. But Blanton Collier, the coach, he said not a good idea. Because he could actually get hurt. And plus he'll be getting in the way on the practice field. And that's true. So anyway, Hal suggested, well, why don't you try out for a high school team? Back then I had a short haircut, and I was only like 3 years out of the Army by then, and was still in pretty good shape. So the night before practice, I called, thinking, where could we do this? Well, I can't do it at St. Ed's. All those kids will recognize me there. Can't do it at Ignatius. Those kids will recognize me there. I'm going to have to go to a spot where a team where nobody will really know me. So I thought, well, let's try Parma. And so I changed my name to Jaworski and called Brian Burke. Brian Burke was the...
What made you pick Jaworski?
We had a makeup printer at the Plain Dealer, so in honor of him, I took his name.
That's
Nice.
so, couldn't because we were in Parma or anything, is that?
Oh yeah, no, because of Parma.
No,
yes.
I know.
So I called Brian Burke, the head coach at Parma, and asked him if he'd go along with this. He said, would he? He loved it. And so he and all the coaches thought they got a big kick out of this. So I got out the day before, we draw our uniform. And back then, high school football practice started on the Friday on or closest to August 20th. And so...
what year were we thinking here?
We're talking 1967.
67,
I do remember
okay.
67.
Okay.
So, and I, looking young, I would have been like 28, 20, something like that. So I introduced myself to some of the new guys, and they said, "You new here?" "Yeah, I just moved in from Chicago." "Oh yeah, what? You play ball up there?" "Yeah." I said, "Were you any good?" I said, "Yeah, I made all state." And what position were you? I was tackle. And there's this kid so big. I play tackle.
Oh,
okay.
Here we go. Yeah.
So that night, I closed Pat Joyce's saloon. I've got to be at practice the next morning at 8 o'clock.
Oh, geez.
And so it's now about midnight, and I look at my watch. And I'm, holy cow! I say to Walter Coulon, the bartender, "Holy smokes, Walter! I gotta get going. I got football practice in the morning." He said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I'm doing a story and trying out for the Parma football team." Old Walter Coulon sort of chuckled, and I said, as I head out the door, over my shoulder, I say to him, "Walter," in all seriousness, I said, "Walter, I hope I don't hurt any of those kids. I would hate to ruin Brian Burke's season." And that was like the ants floating down the Mississippi, shouting, "Raise the drawbridge." So the next morning, I pull up there in my Jaguar convertible, get out of the car, take my last drag on a Pell-Mell, grind it into the parking lot. I hide my car behind the school. And we'll go out there, and off we go.
It's like a scene out of a movie.
Yes. And right off the bat, we do a lot of the calisthenics and the jumping and leaping and all the... And then, this was the first day of practice, where first time the law was, rules where you can't hold any practice, nothing, until the Friday on or closest to August 20th. Suddenly he says, "Offense here, defense there." Everybody knew what the hell they were doing, as though they'd been practicing all summer, which they had been, down in some secluded area in the valley. And so they start. And so I was strong side tackle. Okay, Jaworski, get in there at strong side tackle. I get in there, some asshole would knock me on my ass. I mean, sorry, Paul, is not. I withdraw that statement. Do your magic editing and take that out. Anyway, so that's how it went for 4 days. Pure hell. Because a couple of those kids recognized me. Because one had been down to the Plain Dealer the year before with his older brother, who made the Plain Dealer Dream Team. And every week, take pictures of the players, and this one for the All-Star Week, Player of the Week, things like that. One took his younger brother with him, and this was a kid named Filippic. His younger brother, Mike Filippic, a little kid, a safety. I ran into him a few years ago, and he has a cousin who lives out here somewhere, out here in Fairview somewhere. So every time I looked around, and when they'd say, "Jaworski, get in there at strong side tackle," some kid from the safety position would come rushing up and knock me on my rear end. And it was this Filippic kid, because he recognized me. And the reason he had it out for me was because the year before, his brother had been what was he? He was a starter on the Parma football team, but he was also like their long snapper. He was their long snapper, and he was hurt. He couldn't play. But late in the game, the game was played at Byersfield in a quagmire. That takes me a 12. I have to recall these stories I haven't thought about for 40 years.
I understand. Take your time.
So, in a quagmire, everybody, the uniforms, you couldn't read them, couldn't read the numbers. It had rained for 3 days. 3 days and 3 nights. They were ready to build an ark. Anyway, I covered the game for the Plain Dealer, and Euclid wins 2-0 because the Parma long snapper snapped the ball over the punter's head with like 2 minutes to go in the game. And so thank God, I could read the punter's name. It was the only clean jersey, and it was this kid who wasn't even in the game because for the long snapper, the uniform wasn't dry, but at least he needed a uniform that didn't have all the mud on it, so he could at least wipe his muddy hands on his shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see the number of the kid who snapped the ball over the punter's head, and so I thought, in the spirit of thorough reporting, I gave the kid a plug for the bad snap. I gave the wrong kid the plug. The Philippic kid, I attributed the long snap to this Philippic kid who was not in the game, and so his younger brother was looking for me ever since. And I thought, afterward, when I learned this years later, I said, why the heck didn't you write a letter to Sound Off? Why didn't you write a letter to the editor complaining? But no, instead he tries to kill me on the practice field a year later.
When did they finally figure out? When did they blow the whistle on the whole thing?
By the fourth day, it was clear to everybody that that I was 29 years old, drank and smoked, and my salad days were well behind me. And so by then, I revealed myself, and we used a picture of me in the book, carrying me off the practice field.
Did they get a big kick out of it at the end?
Yeah, they did.
They all took it.
They did. But in fact, I would get there early in the morning before even our coach was there to unlock the locker room door. And I would sit next to, there was one other kid who got there very early. He was a kid who, like me, knew he wasn't going to make the team. So he did not quit his job at Chicken Delight. He only took a leave of absence. And so we would sit there in a darkened hallway at 7:30 in the morning with our backs against the wall. And he would usually eat his lunch while we were that early in the morning. And he had silk socks. He didn't even put sweat socks on. And he's reading one morning. He is reading the paper, the morning paper, and he's reading my story. And I'm quoting the coach of what he said at practice, and this kid says to me, and there were only the two of us here. And my byline said, by Hubert Hopeful. By Hubert Hopeful. And he said, I hope that they reveal who this is who's trying out for the team. And I'm saying, I assure them they probably will. And I think I revealed myself that day.
So I heard this story from Scott and from Nick Kovac at work about a story revolving about you in trying to write one of your books and you getting hijacked while writing your books. I mean, your computer getting hijacked, excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
What happened there? And because we kind of joked a little bit about you loving technology, but not really at all. But what happened? Was it user error, or did your computer really get hacked?
No, I got hacked.
Yeah.
User error in that I was careless and somehow allowed somebody to hack it. Some foreigner. And in fact, I had the computer guy out finally, and he discovered what it was. Oh, yeah, here, embedded in this, here is something that says, I will release this for, they wanted $700. And this turned out the FBI said that back then, was a common cyber crime, because what they were doing in a sheriff's department in Tennessee got hijacked. There were people sitting in jail, and they couldn't do anything. All their files were hijacked, frozen.
Didn't you say it was like the Bolivians or somebody who?
I made it.
You made that up. I know.
Albanians or somebody.
I know, but it's funny
because
right.
the 3 chapters were changed into a foreign language that looked like Russian or Ukrainian or Albanian or some foreign, even a foreign alphabet.
What book was it? Because did you have to rewrite all this?
Yeah, it was only about 3 chapters.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, that was all.
So
I did not send them because, as I said, if that's the only value you put on my 3 chapters is $700, you're not getting a dime. If it were $7,000 or $70,000, I would have negotiated.
Yeah.
But if all you think this is worth, you're not
$700, right? Exactly.
Not a dime.
All right, so I remember your retirement party. I was there. I remember Lou Maglio. I remember
Lou Maglio too. Is he still around?
He's still around. Oh yeah.
So I remember Lou. He's like, Danny, and how Lou tends to make very flowery, and so there were 3 or 4 big Dell computer boxes up there. Danny, we know how you love computers, and you're up there, and you're like, you got to be kidding me. Take it from there.
Yes. And they had my 2 sons. 2 of my 3 sons were there.
Was Joe one of them?
Joe and John, yes.
Yeah.
And Joe from the Auto Wash?
No, I remember Joe from playing in the Fox State charity basketball games 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. Anyway, they called Joe and John up to give me a gift from everybody, all my friends. And it's a big old Dell computer box. And I said, oh no, they're giving me a computer? Open it, and there was a cube, a 30-pack of Miller Lite. Yes.
I remember when I interned under you and John Tellage and Tony Rizzo, that it was a weekend. You were filling in for JT, and you were trying to print your scripts, and the printer jammed. And as an intern, I'm like, I don't know what to do, and you were just punching the crap out of that.
You didn't like Bill Gates very much.
You didn't like the printer, and it didn't jam.
Channel 8 bought the cheapest equipment there was.
But Danny, the printer, I remember this, the printer wasn't jammed. It didn't have paper.
Whoa. Now you tell me.
And now, I then fixed the printer and put the paper in and all that good stuff. But no, it was good times.
Good memories.
Good memories. Okay, last question before we wrap up. You've been around in this market for, I don't know how many years, in living here for your whole life.
Okay.
But
I started at the Plain Dealer in 1964.
64.
So
you've interviewed and met thousands and thousands of athletes in Cleveland and out. You mentioned Muhammad Ali. Give us your top 3 favorite Cleveland sports athletes that you covered during your entire career at the Plain Dealer and at Fox 8 and anywhere else in between. Do you have a top 3 on a personal level, or just someone you like to root for?
I find that I wrote more stories about Doug Deacon than anybody else.
Okay, so Deke is one?
Deacon has to be one. There were just so many good guys. We had so good times with so many of them.
How about Cavs? Let's go basketball.
But Brian Sipe was a great guy. He was a headliner.
Yeah.
And good for the town.
Any Cavs players from the 80s? Mark Price, even Austin Carr?
Austin Carr was a great guy. Yeah. Those guys from the Miracle of Brickfield team. Austin Carr.
Bingo Smith, was he on that team?
I just saw Bingo a few months ago. Yeah, he's in a wheelchair.
Wow.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
The Cavs brought him back for the 50th anniversary a couple years ago. They did, yeah. They had him back.
He's in a wheelchair. Okay.
Yep.
Campy.
Yeah.
And Austin Carr. And those great guys. They were good guys. It was fun covering that team.
Yeah, I was just talking with both of those guys recently about coming on, and they're down to do it. We're going to get them on later this summer before the season to start.
Those are such good guys. Yeah. Other guys, Duke Sims was fun to be around.
Oh.
You got to love Duke Sims.
Yes.
and when I traveled with the Indians, those were good. Jeff Torborg became a great friend of mine, the manager, and his staff. Joe Nossick. One night, Joe Nossick still lives on an Amherst somewhere, and so one night late at night, I'm watching the ESPN or somebody is showing the highlights or entire games from the '65 World Series, Minnesota Twins and Dodgers, and here's Joe Nossick up there facing Sandy Koufax, and I called Joe. And I said, Joe, turn on your TV. I'm like, watching you and just he said, don't bother, I struck out. And he did. Anyway,
wow.
Oh, geez. Oh, and we had Harvey Haddix was our pitching coach. And he pitched the greatest game of all time, the 12-inning perfect game in 1957 or 58. He was pitching for the Pirates in Milwaukee. And I did a big piece on him in the Plain Dealer before he was our pitching coach. And he had a bad cold, was not feeling well, and he pitched a 12-inning perfect game, and he lost it to the Braves. So, and he loved talking about this. So we would have our family night at Clifton Beach on Wednesday nights, and Jeff and Harvey, when they were in town and on and off Wednesday, they would come down with our family for picnics. And he would tell my brothers-in-law about that night. He loved telling it. It was a thrilling story.
Oh, yeah.
How his health was not good. It was a muggy night and a rainy, drizzly night, and the whole thing. Now, he's our pitching coach. And we're on the road in Baltimore. We stayed way outside of town. And after a game, I'm really hungry, so I had to run across this highway to a Howard Johnson's to get something to eat after the game. And I went over there, and Harvey was already there. Harvey had been a drinker in his day, but now he was drinking nothing but coffee and smoked cigarettes. Coffee and cigarettes. And there he is sitting at the bar of this Howard Johnson's restaurant, talking to these two strangers, a man and a woman, just traveling in their car, like cross country. I could tell, I said, can I wait to you? He is telling them about the night he pitched the perfect game. And they're enthralled. And Harvey enjoyed telling that story.
Wow.
Some guys, they get tired of talking about it. Harvey never tired of it. No, never did. He was so nice.
He probably came across, too, as a person who wasn't boisterous. He just liked telling a story.
Yes. He was a slim guy. He might have weighed 150 pounds. Yes.
Well, Danny, we want to thank you very much. We could go on and on and on. I'm
yes,
sure when we
could.
leave here, we'll probably think of a bunch of questions, which I'll probably have to ask you on the phone later on down the line. But we want to thank you for spending a lot of time with us here today. Just kind of recapping some of the bullet points and some of the stories that maybe aren't in your books. You have 4 of them.
And I hope to do a 5th.
You want to do a 5th? That was my next question.
Yes. But I have to get the energy to do it. During that COVID time, I never got COVID, but we're sitting around with nothing to do, and it sapped my energy.
Really?
And I've got the life story of Don Elbon to do. He's was a boxing promoter here, has wild stories, but I'm doing his life story, and I better get it done because he's 90 years old.
Wow.
So anyway, now I hope to get the energy back after I have this spinal fusion.
Yeah, we wish you nothing but the best and a speedy recovery on it. This has been a tremendous experience sitting here talking Cleveland sports with you and hearing stories.
Well, Channel 8 probably had something to do with my back injury because I was doing that story for them. And by the way, we had to use the video from the track because Ralph Tarsitano was supposed to be my photographer, shoot that story.
Right, I remember Ralph. Yeah.
He called in sick.
No kidding.
I went down there and I had no photographer. But the track photographers,
sure,
they did it.
That's great.
Yes.
Danny, it's always a pleasure talking with you. And
Scott and John,
thank you so much.
John, I watch you every weekend. Now, I'm not up that early
Aren't you
in the
not?
morning customarily.
Oh, well, all right. Well,
Scott.
Well, the important thing is you're watching the better of the Sabol Brothers.
Here we go.
So that's the best thing. No, I appreciate that.
Danny, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Well, John, that is exactly what I thought it would be, and much more. Danny always lives up to it. When I asked him to do the podcast, and he was game. He was excited. We went out to his local watering hole, Gunzelman's, out in Fairview Park, and just like we talked about, you give him a little bit, and he'll run with it. And those stories were unreal, and his recall, going back 60 years, it's like it happened yesterday.
Yeah, someone that old usually may not be that sharp. I mean, Danny's not a spring chicken anymore, but he is as sharp as he probably was when he was 25. And Danny's in his early 80s now.
Yeah, easily, yeah.
Yeah, it's just incredible for his recollection of all those stories going back in the day to the old Indians days. But more impressive, the whole Monaco story out there was just incredible, covering that, the race there.
I'd never heard that story before.
Yeah. And then, of course, the Muhammad Ali story, and got to sit with him in his hotel room. Muhammad Ali, easily probably on the Mount Rushmore of American athletes all time. Who gets to sit in his hotel room and just talk to him, sits on his bed and has a casual conversation?
Because that conversation probably wouldn't have happened 3 or 4 years later, after, what year was that? 1964. He was so big and he was blowing up into this worldwide icon. I don't think he would have had access if it was 68, let's say, compared to the year, 63 or 64. So he was really lucky.
I would agree, Scott. I don't think that would have happened. And Danny knows how fortunate he was to have him there. The other thing too is, the stories of plane ride fights with the Indians back in the day. And man, we got to get Ron Pruitt back on here to talk about what exactly happened on that one.
I know. Yeah. Cause he's my neighbor. He lives down the street from me, and I'll have to bring it up to him just casually. I'm sure he doesn't really want to talk, but I mean, it was that's how it was back then. I mean, those guys, they would, have a few pops, but the next day everything was fine. So can you imagine social media back then?
Scott, there'd be so many lawsuits going on in sports these days.
I can only imagine.
Just even in the 90s, if you think about it,
Right. Mid-late 90s or even early 2000s, right before the onset of that. But
absolutely.
So, John, let's see, what other one stands out? The Muhammad Ali one, the Monaco story, Monte Carlo story. Is that what it was, right? When he was at the race?
Mm-hmm. Monaco. Yeah.
Monaco. And the one that always, when I read his book, because I've read all his books, is the one where he went undercover to high school football. What was out in Parma in the early mid 60s or something like. I love that story.
Yeah, he was in his early 20s when he did that, which is fantastic.
Yes.
Nowadays, you couldn't get away with that either.
No,
I mean, kids be like, wait a second, who is that guy? That guy was he on TV? Type of
talking
thing.
about putting out a cigarette in the parking lot and all this sort of thing.
Oh yeah, we didn't really talk much about this when we were interviewing with him, but explain just to listeners, Scott, for your real quick, your relationship with Danny working at Fox 8, because I got to be his intern for 4 years along with John Telledge and Tony Rizzo in 2007. You got to work with him for a while. Before we wrap this up, just kind of give the listeners just a little bit of the taste that it was like working with him.
It was. Yeah. I worked with him on the weekends, my first, 4 or 5 years at Fox 8, and especially on big sports nights. He was old school, did not like technology. So he would always needed somebody to, print something or what have you. And it was kind of the running joke. But, even back then, he was already in his late 60s, almost 70 years old, still writing his own scripts, going out into the studio. It was fun. He's a very sarcastic guy, but a guy who lights up the room. And, sometimes in this day and age, sometimes I think, offices and newsrooms, maybe some of the stuff that went on back then, probably you couldn't get away with it now, in 2022, but it was all good, harmless fun. And he was a guy, again, who lit up the room. You liked talking to him. If he wasn't busy, he would talk your ear off. It was a joy. It really was a joy to come into work every weekend on a Saturday and a Sunday evening, just to hang out with Danny and talk to him and just to learn about all the things that he's learned. And hopefully he would pass the knowledge along to you.
I'm excited to work with him a little bit here coming up in the fall with Friday Night Touchdown, our high school football show on Fox 8. He's still a contributor there. John Telledge will be back. We'll have a big cast. That'd be fun to be there along with him. Kind of comes full circle for me, being, again, his former intern. We want to thank Dan Coughlin again for coming on the podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. And thank you for listening on the Apple and Spotify. We will be bringing more interesting stories coming up in the next few weeks from 2 guests. I want to tease this real quick. 2 guests that one is near and dear to our hearts, and another one that has a tie to a former Cleveland sports and baseball legend. We'll leave it with that. So
yes, that's going to be a fun one. Absolutely, John. So you can follow me. I'm on Twitter at Scott Sabol FOX8. And John?
You can follow me at John_Sabol and follow the pod at Sabol Brothers.
Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the podcast. Let us know what you think.